Hello, I'm reading chapter 14 of How to Be a Pirate. And this is called The Day Takes a Turn for the Worse, which is not a good sign because things haven't been going so well so far. Anyway, so Stoic never finished the word invincible because halfway through he was grabbed around the neck by an enormous wild-eyed individual and a not very clean knife was held to his neck. So the word ended up a little bit more like invinci, ugh, 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 as Stoic choked and his eyes popped. All around the rowing benches, every hooligan aboard had been grabbed from behind and knives were held at every throat. The hooligans' nerves were still jangling from the flight from the scullions. You see, it really had been a very bad day so far already, and they had been so busy arguing that they hadn't noticed a small, sleek boat sneaking up through the mist and drawing alongside the Lucky 13. A boat named the Hammerhead, with a sail curved like a shark's fin and a red skull and crossbones painted on the side, and a boat packed to the brim with outcasts. They were not a pretty crew, despite their height and their handsome red hair and their gorgeous clothes and every kind of golden ornament. Many had scars carved into their faces. One or two were without a nose or an ear. Most had carved their teeth into sharp little points like the teeth of a shark. Even the good-looking ones were disfigured by dark red tattoos had to be made out of the blood of their enemies. They talked to each other in the most difficult of Viking languages, outcastese, which sounds very much like the barking of a dog. The outcasts had swarmed over the side and crept up behind the hooligans. That's the teeth shining filed into little shark points. As they were admiring the treasure and themselves. Toothless had smelt them, of course. He knew they were coming and he'd been going crazy inside the big heavy barrel, shrieking at the top of his voice, "Outcasts! Run for your lives, you stupid humans!" But nobody had heard him. All in all, this was turning out to be a very bad day for the hooligans. Outcasts like scullions are the kind of person one really hopes one can live a lifetime without bumping into, let alone seeing both of them at close quarters in the space of one morning. Hiccup did not realise they were outcasts, but he knew they were bad trouble. His heart started jumping in his chest like a mud skipper as he looked into the terrible face of the man who had Stoic fast by the throat. His curly horns were quite 3 feet high, and when he opened his mouth, he growled like a dog. For a whole minute, nobody said a word. That's him, Lucy. He's just not friendly. Nobody said a word. Nobody dared move a muscle. There was no noise at all apart from that terrible dog-like growling from the outcast who was holding Stoic, and the sound of Alvin drinking. There was no knife at Alvin's throat. Calmly he finished off the last delicious drops of blackcurrant wine. Smoothly he put the cup down. "I thought that I would provide a surprise ending to our little journey," said Alvin with his charming smile. "I do like surprises, don't you, Stoic?" Stoic gargled inarticulately. "Such fun, aren't they?" continued Alvin. "I'm so sorry to say, however, that the day of glory for the hooligan tribe may be put off for a while. You see, I feel that I ought to have rather more than the 10%. And in case you didn't agree, I thought I would bring along some of my relatives to persuade you to give it up." Stoic gargled again. Alvin barked out a few words in outcastese to Curlyhorns, who barked back at him again. "I have to admit at this point that I have been guilty of a little innocent deception," said Alvin. "My name is not Alvin the poor but honest farmer. I am in fact his most mighty murderousness, Alvin the treacherous, great high chieftain of the outcast tribe. I don't know why, but I felt that if I told you that from the beginning, you might not have given me a very warm welcome." "An outcast?" gasped the hooligans. Alvin laughed. "That's right," he said, "an outcast. Us outcasts don't always get around on all fours dressed in animal skins, you know. Even we are moving with the times." He went over to Stoic and gently removed the storm blade from Stoic's hand. "Mine, I think," said Alvin. Alvin unscrewed the claw from his right hand, as Hiccup had seen him do this once before. This is very clever. So he put the sword holder contraption into its place, in which he carefully twisted the storm blade, he screwed it very tightly so that it was completely steady. And while he did all this, he talked. "You see, Stoic," said Alvin, "we barbarian chieftains are facing a new challenge. We have to fight the creeping forces of civilization by becoming fiercer and crueler than ever. You, Stoic, have gone soft." "I have not," protested Stoic indignantly. "Grimbet the Ghastly would be turning in his grave if he could see you now," tut-tutted Alvin. "You hooligans have become mere bungling amateurs, all nose and show, with no real wickedness to you at all. Now, I have worked hard to bring us outcasts up to date. Outwardly, we now have some of the clothes and manners of civilization, but inwardly, we are tougher and more morally outcast, more truly outcast than we have ever been. We are your real professional pirates, heartless, murdering, blood-sucking slave traders." Alvin paused for breath. "Talking of which," he then continued, "take your last look at your rather plain little island." He gestured at the friendly cliffs of Burke. "All of you hooligans are about to enter the slave trade yourselves in the very important role of slaves." The hooligan groaned. There was no worse fate for a proud and independent Viking than to be sold into bondage. "I'm sure you will all make excellent slaves," said Alvin kindly, "because you are all very strong and, frankly, none too clever. And I do hate to threaten, but anybody who objects will thoroughly regret it." An outcast with no nose stepped forward and uncurled an ugly black whip from around his waist with a handle shaped like a serpent. Alvin clapped his hand and the outcast began loading the hooligans onto the deck of the Hammerhead. "Yup, you shall all be slaves. All, that is," smiled Alvin, "except for you, Stoic." Curly Horns, I just have a feeling this is going to be bad. Curly Horns let Stoic go, and proudly he stepped forward. "To chieftains and their descendants we pay the ultimate sign of respect," said Alvin with just a tiny hint of menace in his voice, "by eating them." "But that's cannibalism," said Stoic, shocked. I know, sighed Alvin. "It's very old-fashioned of me, but I would lose respect in front of the rest of my tribe if I dropped all the old traditions." But, blustered Stoic. "I shall not change your mind, whatever you say," said Alvin gently. "The thing about dinner is it never wants to be eaten. I mean, you eat pork, don't you, Stoic?" "Well, yes," admitted Stoic. "There you are then," said Alvin. "No pig is ever going to volunteer to be supper." And thinking of volunteers, something seemed to be amusing Alvin. He giggled delightedly. "I mentioned that it would not only be Stoic who would receive this honour," said Alvin, "but also his descendants. I know there has been some sort of argument about this recently. The question is," continued Alvin, struggling to keep a straight face, "who is the heir to Stoic the Vast? Could they put up their hand, please?" Strangely enough, Stoic Snotlout did not put up his hand at this point. Instead, he tried to hide behind Dog's Breath the Durbrain, staring very hard at his bronze tips saddle, as if he hadn't quite heard the question. "Was there a question?" Hiccup sighed. He stood right up on the bench so that everyone could see him. "I," said Hiccup, "I am the heir to Stoic the Vast." That's what I love about Hiccup. He's so brave. Stoic smiled, a big, proud smile. For all their manners, the outcasts whispered a great deal at that. Hiccup didn't have to speak outcast-ease to know what they were saying, which was things like, "That skinny little prawn is the heir to the hairy hooligans." Two gigantic outcasts lifted Hiccup from the bench and set him down next to Stoic the Vast. Alvin held up the storm blade. The sword was now just an extension of his arm, like the horn of a narwhal is an extension of its nose. "It looks as if it has always been there, doesn't it?" That's an outcast. Oh, they are not nice. The daylight played across the bolt of lightning motif. Alvin drew a finger across the blade ever so lightly, and blood instantly dropped onto the deck. "Nice and sharp. This won't take a second," promised Alvin, stepping towards Hiccup. And that's the end of the chapter. I'm so sorry. We're going to have to find out what happens at chapter 15 tomorrow. See you then.